So, hey there, Sculpt and Flow listeners. Have recently been having a little delve around through some old bits and pieces that I put together some time ago, just kind of journaling, really. Which, if any of you do journal, you'll know that it can be a really helpful way of processing. Really, for me, particularly, it's a really good way of processing feelings, thoughts, in terms of what's coming up, but especially what's just happened. Now, this particular pod is one that I've put together about a particular journey of my own, which is how to train for labour with Sculpt and Flow Fitness. And it, this came around really from, as I mentioned, having a little delve around in my own kind of journals. And I found really a story that I had written pretty much after my second child was born, pretty much as I came out of hospital, and was, I'd say, maybe 2 or 3 days after. How I found that, I mean, obviously found the time between breastfeeding because he was very, very, very hungry, Mana, which, if you haven't heard the name before, it's a Maori word. I hope my pronunciation is on point, which means to honour and respect, which is a beautiful name. Chris is Maori, and my partner, and I wrote this story about Mana's birth because it was so significantly different from my experience with Kahi, my first child, which her name is based around a Maori proverb, which means little strength. But I won't go into the story. There's a whole nother story down there about their names. But put down my thoughts because, as I mentioned, the birth experience was so completely different. And I wanted to write it not just for my own journaling, but down the track, I just had a intuitive feeling that if there was an opportunity for me to share it, then hopefully it could be really helpful to anyone, someone who might find themselves in a similar situation, that it might help them feel empowered and maybe take the steps to really make their birth experience their own and their babies. Um, and I should mention, when I had Mana, I was 41. I'm 46 now. And because of my age, I was triaged as a geriatric, in medical speak. And if you're listening as a medical person, I hope that again I'm on point. With all due respect, I hope this is on point, as a geriatric mother because of my age, which automatically triaged me into high risk. Plus the fact my first child had been via emergency C-section. So I was already at high risk being 41, and I was at high risk because my first child was born via emergency C-section. So was automatically in this very, specialist triaged group. So with that as an introduction, and mentioning, that the name of this pod is how I trained myself for labour, um, particularly with regards to my second child, I'm going to read my story, and with hand on heart, I really hope, certainly if you are pregnant at the moment, and you are in a similar position, that this can be helpful to you. When I was 21 weeks pregnant, I heard about hypnobirthing, and this was through a friend back in the UK. My daughter, who was 1.5 at that time, had been birthed via emergency C-section, and I was very keen to do all in my power to avoid having that experience again. After speaking with my friend, I organised a couple of FaceTime sessions with a hypnobirthing teacher in the UK. And this is really where not just my hypnobirthing journey, but my birthing journey with my son Mana began. Something that had really stuck with me from the birth of our first child was that being induced, birthing felt like something that was happening to me, as if the synthetic hormone syntocinon had literally possessed my body and there was nothing I could do about it, or the literal fear that I had of dying. And after an epidural, all my faith was literally placed into the hands of the doctors, as I could not feel my baby moving down, little alone what I now call surges, but you might know as contractions. The birth was a typical example of, once you open the doors to intervention, be prepared that intervention will no doubt navigate its way into the whole of your labour and birth. So through these early FaceTime sessions, I was really excited to read about self-empowerment. This was by gathering information, asking questions, talking and dealing with my last experience, which had been traumatic. And this was in order to work through my fears. And I learned that this was important so my body could produce oxytocin, which is our happy hormone. And this cannot happen if the body is in a fear response. That we cannot be in a fear response and calm response at the same time. And it was all making sense to me in relation to my birthing. I learnt about brains, brains. I'll elaborate on this in a moment. And if the doctor or midwife was telling me about what they were going to do to me or what was going to happen to me, I would be able to ask questions so that I could make an informed decision on what was right for me and right for my baby. So to have confidence to ask the question. So B, what are the benefits? R, what are the risks? A, what are the alternatives? I, what does my intuition say? N, do nothing at all. And S, smile sweetly and just say you'll think about it. This process was priceless when it came to the protocol of VEs. VEs are vaginal examinations. Through my last experience, I realized that having what seemed like constant VEs, it was not helping me to stimulate oxytocin in my body, help me relax and feel happy. It was making me feel more and more uncomfortable with strangers reaching their arm into my vagina, literally, and sometimes even having a medical trainee present to boot. So great for one's self-empowerment. When I ask questions about this, I realize that many VEs are simply the norm or normal procedure. And this, in many cases, is different to the wants and the needs of the individual woman and her baby. So this time round, I declined all VEs, including a stretch and sweep. So I learned that they are normally the norm, but this time round I declined all VEs, including the stretch and sweep. This was in the knowledge that my baby and me were well. So we were well. I knew we were healthy. Obviously, if there was an emergency, my reaction at that point might have been different. But at this point, absolutely everything was fine. So I declined all VEs, including the stretch and sweep, right up until I got to the hospital where I was fully dilated. So I'd managed to labour at home, which was absolutely incredible. And I had my second baby in the bath an hour and a half later, and this was without any drugs or any intervention. And I will reiterate at this point, this was in complete contrast to my first birthing experience. Epidural, induction, just to name a couple. The intervention was a lot. So to then be having an experience where I could feel everything, I was totally, totally present. I wasn't feeling nauseous. It was just an absolutely, completely different experience. And that came from hypnobirthing, giving me the confidence to ask the questions in the first place. As my story, how it affected me is by the time I got to talk to anybody, I completely forget all my questions. I'd be so nervous, I would just sit and listen to what was being said to me, and then I'd leave and go, oh my goodness, I didn't ask any of my questions. So I had the confidence to ask, rather than just going, oh, these are the medical professionals, who am I to question them? With all due respect and understanding that, I also began to understand, like in any profession, different doctors and indeed different midwives practice differently. Some are more policy driven than others. Some are more medicalized. Some are more, let's say, natural, for want of a better word. And it was for this reason, it was really important for me to find medical professionals that I trusted and who I could see were treating me individually and uniquely, as opposed to simply spitting out the usual jargon, as in, the triage speak. And if you've been there, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. This new found confidence was giving me more and more confidence to cease contact with my home care midwife, who was amazing, and she was coming out to see me at home, and I really fully appreciated that. So I must say at this point, none of this is in disregard or disrespect to any medical professional or anyone that helped me out, because I truly value it. I will keep coming back to how this particular pod is about my journey and how I used my new, let's say, my training through hypnobirthing and more of my connection to my own confidence to be able to ask questions to give me the birthing experience that I really wanted to have. So that is why I think it was about 38 weeks that I said goodbye to our current, or the medical professional that had been looking after me up until that point, because the midwife, I should say, because I had said very specifically at 38 weeks that I wanted to have a VBAC, sometimes known as an NBAC. Anyone who's not familiar with these terms, it means vaginal birth after cesarean, which is the one I prefer personally to NBAC, which is natural birth after cesarean, because in my humble opinion, all birthing is natural, however baby has come out, whether it's out the sunroof or not. As I say to my daughter Kahi, you came out the sunroof. It's all natural. So for all mothers to feel empowered and not disempowered for being judged on how their baby's born. I mean, the judgment starts early, doesn't it? How you carry your pregnancy, or that's another story, or that's another podcast in itself. So big respect to all mothers who have birthed their babies naturally. But what is important here is this particular midwife was listening to not listening to my wants and needs after 38 weeks. So for any mum to be understood, I understand the fear of wanting to birth your baby vaginally when you're up against fear-installing statements from your healthcare provider, i.e. if it doesn't work out, in my case, if it doesn't work out, hemorrhaging to death and uterine scar rupture, which incidentally can happen during an induced birth, but my midwife hadn't taught me that. I bought Catherine Graves' hypnobirthing book, and I practiced simple techniques such as relaxation methods every day for 20 minutes, as she suggests, a realistic amount of time per day for anybody to find time to practice. I printed out a number of photographs that had a positive and calming effect on me, and had positive affirmations all around the house, such as each surge brings my baby closer to me. With the benefit of hindsight, I realised that this hypnobirthing book was brilliant preparation for my subconscious,
It wasn't like in labour, I suddenly went to chapter 4, paragraph 3, for example, but more like every time I had a surge, to breathe with it. And not once did my mind entertain asking for drugs or intervention, because I knew I was well and my baby was well. So it's just let me have my baby. Not once in my mind, and that is a testament to the power behind the positive thinking and self-belief that I learned from this book, did I question my ability to have my baby vaginally. Stay focused on where you want to go and you will get there. Focus on the pathways and you will get there. Focus on the potholes and that's where you will end up. And these are really, really important life strategies. So by the time I had my second baby, I was also feeling very passionate and empowered about empowering the pregnant lady and treating her like an absolute goddess rather than just another slab on the production line. And if we didn't start getting our power back, it was going to be taken from us altogether. In May Gaskin's book, which I read many times, it was incredibly influential in this regard. Someone offered it to me during my first pregnancy and I didn't look at it. Deep down, I had labelled it as hippie shit. What an ignorant decision to make. Oh well, this time round, I was not going to make the same mistake. The history provided in this book was just so informative. It gets me every time that women only started giving birth on their back due to a French king wanting to watch his mistress give birth. And it was considered undignified to be squatting on all fours. And this, on one's back, was considered dignified. It's totally against gravity, as if giving birth isn't hard enough, and again the needs and wants of the mother, but more convenient for whoever's watching and the medical professional. All this information gathering was giving me power. Understanding how the uterus actually works is fascinating. When we understand how something works, we can utilize it more effectively. I talk about this, I digress, with the Pilates reformer bed all the time, but yet now I'm putting it into my body. When we understand how something works, we can utilize it more effectively. And Catherine Graves explained everything in so much detail and yet so simply at the same time. Her book was really resonating with me. She also recommended using a doula, which we did, and I literally cannot put into words how valuable her input was. By the time I reached 39 weeks, I had completed my birth plan. I'd worked hard to gain consultant support, as a water birth, which was what I wanted, had been against hospital policy at some point, and we kept having to revisit what the current policy was. I knew that I wanted a physiological third stage. This means allowing my placenta to birth naturally. As the home care midwife had told me that it would have to be, and I repeat, have to be, induced. Active third stage, where they inject syntocinon at the top of your legs as the baby's shoulders emerge to make the placenta come quicker. That made no sense to me. If the birth to that point had been going okay and safely, then why intervene all of a sudden? My midwife was wrong. At 40 weeks, I had an appointment at the hospital where the doctor said we could go until 41 and a half weeks, but booked me an appointment at the maternity day unit at 41 weeks on the dot to discuss our options if I was still pregnant then. As if the stress isn't enough, right? And then you're told if your baby's after 37 weeks, you're late. Oh, goodness me. Between 40 and 41 weeks, I started getting very nervous. During that time, particularly the day before my scheduled appointment, I tried everything to bring on labour naturally. This included going to see an acupuncturist who was amazing. She gave me homework with acupressure points and breath techniques. She told me to stop wearing shorts that were tight around my lower abdomen and to stay upright and active, although gently, as much as possible. I was climbing upon my poor partner first thing in the morning, dancing, watching lots of Kevin Bridges and Sean Locke, who, rest in peace, Sean Locke, were my two favourite stand-up comedians, and eating Japanese curry. And my thoughts were, this is your last day before the appointment, Bex. Give it your best shot. Don't slouch on the couch. So the night before my appointment, or should I say early morning Friday, I woke up to tightenings in my lower abdomen at about 2 a.m. This had happened at exactly the same time on the Tuesday before. I got up and I just started to walk around to see if it would pass, or the surges would pass. Our daughter was asleep and I was eager not to wake her up. The house was very quiet and still. At about 2:30 a.m, I said to my partner that it was feeling a bit different to the other night, and he quietly got up and started doing his thing. I texted our doula as the surges started getting closer together, and most of them bringing me to my knees, and asked her to come over. She arrived at about 3:30 a.m. Chris had rung the hospital and shortly after rung our friend to come and pick Kahi, our daughter, who was still asleep, up. I knew I wanted to stay at home for as long as possible, and through my hypnobirthing practice, it has ignored in my subconscious to stay calm, ingrained in my subconscious to stay calm, not to panic, to try and keep gently mobile. I remember answering the door to Carmel, our doula, who was also a midwife at the hospital. We were going to birth at, and straight away having a strong surge that brought me to my knees. She asked what I needed, and I asked her to run the bath with some lavender oil. I spent pretty much the next 2 hours in the bath, whilst our friend picked up Kahi and Chris and got the car ready, whilst Carmel was breathing with me through the surges that were getting stronger, longer and closer together. I remember just trying to take each surge one by one, not to wonder how many there would be or think about the time. I felt my waters break in the bath and lost my mucus plug on the toilet. And at about 5:30 a.m, Carmel suggested that we should start thinking about getting to the hospital. She was calm, and I could see her eyes were gentle, kind, and positive. And though the surges were very powerful by now, I was ultra aware of my environment, and I could feel if I got anxious or stressed, it just made the surges much harder to breathe through. I knew I had to get to the hospital for safety's sake, given that I was having a VBAC. And as I mentioned earlier, I was very, very, very aware of the risks. At about 5:30 a.m, I finally got out of the bath. I didn't want to leave it, managed to grab my dressing gown and moved as fast as I could with Carmel and Chris, my partner, to the garage. I had about 3 surges in the garage as there was not enough room for me and Carmel on the back seat and with the car seats up. So Carmel reclined the passenger seat and she squeezed into the back and off we went. With the benefit of hindsight, I think I was going through transition in the car. This is where your cervix dilates the final 8 to 10 centimetres. It was incredibly intense and powerful. My whole body was shaking and I was trying to focus on my out breath and trying not to bite Carmel's arm off whilst whacking the car door. When we got to the hospital, Carmel told Chris to park in the emergency section, thank goodness. Chris grabbed me a wheelchair and in we flew to the hospital, to the birthing suite. I noticed that the surges were always better to deal with when I was moving, in the car, in the bath. So when we went up the elevator, I asked Chris to just keep me moving, spin me round on the spot if he had to. Must have looked quite funny. When we arrived at the birthing suite, we were told I would not be allowed a room with a bath as I was a VBAC woman. My doula promptly said I had consultant support, which I had to check my obstetric notes, coupled with my cry to get me out of this chair, landed us in a room with a bath. This may not have happened if I had not prepared the way I had learnt through hypnobirthing. As soon as I entered the room, a midwife asked to do a VE, vaginal examination, and I was expecting this, so it was no shock to my system or concern, and she concluded I was fully dilated, at which point I got my gown off and straight into the bath. On my knees, with my hands gripping the front of the bath, I felt a huge wave of relief ripple through my body because I knew this is where I was meant to be, and I knew that this is where I would stay. A cannula had been placed in my hand, and again I knew that this would happen through my preparation, so it wasn't a nasty surprise, and a belt placed around my lower abdomen for the CTG machine to monitor baby's heart rate. As a VBAC woman, they were hoping to look for continual heart rate monitoring as opposed to intermittent, given that we're high risk, I was. And what they would look for in a natural, not necessarily look for in a natural labour with no previous complications. After about 10 minutes, one of the midwives was asking me to get out of the bath as the heart rate was intermittent. My body was not moving out of that bath. My doula, the student midwife, Chris, and the main midwife on shift were down on their knees with me, telling me the baby was okay as we kept picking the heart rate back up. In my heart, I could feel it was okay. I knew he was moving down with my breath. I knew that was why his body and his breath was in sync with my surges. And I knew I had support, and I could see the kindness and the support in the eyes of those that were closest to me. Somewhere between here and when I felt my baby crowning, 2 separate doctors asked me to get out of the bath as they wanted to put a fetal cap on the baby's head to get a continual heart rate. My body worked with them as best as I could. Every time I had a surge, though, I had to be in the water. There was no question of this. When I heard the male doctor say again, "You are going to have to get out of the bath," it was all I needed to breathe out as hard as I could with that surge. The front row of my support team said that they could see the baby's head, and then I heard the midwife say, "The head is out," and then I felt the midwife pull my baby out. Both doctors were behind the midwives watching this natural birth or vaginal birth unfold into a success. The photo of Mana in this moment is amazing, and as soon as he was pulled out, he was placed on my chest. We had done it, him and I and our team. Right up until the last minute, we had to stay focused. We fought for the birth that we believed in, and in the end, nature prevailed. Baby will come when baby is ready. I remember feeling absolutely overwhelmed with love, gratitude, and relief. I will never ever forget that moment for the rest of my life. The room was darkened and still. I told Chris I loved him and held little, or not so little, 4.26 kilos, Mana Michael, close so I could kiss his head. A little while later, Chris cut the cord and I birthed the placenta naturally as we had planned for. No need for an active third stage, as the midwife had told me was policy. I can honestly say, as a woman who has given birth twice with 2 absolute polar opposite experiences, for any woman thinking about a VBAC, it is possible. And not just possible, but completely life-changing and utterly incredible. Hypnobirthing gave me confidence and empowerment And as I reflect, I find it strange on my part that first time round I didn't think to ask any questions. If I was purchasing a new car, I'd shop around, I'd ask the questions, get really informed about the pros and cons of the vehicle before I made a decision. Yet, however, with my own body, first time round, I lost all confidence of my self-knowledge and I put all the control into the hands of others. So the birth was completely out of my control on all levels, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Don't get me wrong. I am highly appreciative for the care and the attention that I received from all medical professionals. I am simply sharing my experience for those women like me who feel like they want to get their power back before it is taken from them altogether. You can do it. You and your baby, along with your trusted support team, can make this happen. Go for it. I really hope that listening to this story has been helpful for anyone listening, not just in your empowerment, but how you can train yourself for your labour experience. Just like I did, you can get informed and you can get your team around you and you can orchestrate the birth that you want. You focus on what you want and let everyone else focus on the other stuff. The what ifs, you don't need to worry about those. You focus on what you want and let the healthcare and the professionals and the team focus on the what ifs. You've got this.